Yo, what is up? Welcome to Ninja Geek Games. This is Among Cultists, a 4 to 8 player game of social deduction, hidden agendas and forbidden rituals. Set in a university, investigators from a secret society must work together to research law and score victory points to prevent the onset of a ritual. However, one or more players take on the role of cultists with hidden identities who are only looking to sabotage the investigators' progress or kill them. The game may sound familiar as it's inspired by the popular Among Us, but now has been brought to the tabletop. Let's take a look. The very first aspect of the game that I like is player role selection. At setup, you create a deck of cards for each player in the game, specific to either an investigator or cultist. Investigators have decks made up largely of alive and success cards, whereas a cultist also includes dead cards as well as failure or sabotage cards, and I'll explain the use of these later. The number of cultists in the game is dependent on player count, and during setup you create their deck and mark them with a special cultist token. You then create decks for each of the remaining players and again mark these with investigator tokens. Then, each of these decks goes into an envelope that are mixed up and randomly assigned to the players in the game, who then take the cards and token to see which role they'll take on. This is quite exciting, where you get to discover what role you've been assigned, cultist or investigator. Not only that, you then get to carry out a night phase before the game begins, where cultists gain knowledge of who else is on their team. Everyone closes their eyes and cultists are allowed to peek and give each other a cheeky wink. This is a fun part of the game setup where everyone starts looking around trying to figure out who the bad guys are, so you need to play it cool or risk being exposed even before the game begins. Let's look at the rest of the components. The game setup is pretty simple. The main board is formed from a number of double-sided tiles and you just match them up based on player count. This represents a university and is separated by multiple coloured rooms divided by hallways. Each of the rooms has a separate area where action cards can be placed, of which there are 3 types: success, failure and sabotage, and these are used in various actions during play. These tokens indicate which rooms are still unavailable for activation and are flipped when investigators are allowed to check the room for lore in order to gain victory points, which is recorded here. There are a few other board tokens to include more cultists, power, voting and the dreaded fishman, as well as separate draw decks for the success and failure cards and an unsafe passage area. This bookshelf area is where all the room book tokens are placed when investigators successfully carry out room actions, and this clock is the round tracker that has spots for event tokens drawn from a bag. Lastly, all characters are represented by these huge hockey puck-like discs that are double-sided with a ghost version on the reverse side, and each player also has a character board where some of their cards are stored. The components are pretty good quality and thematic with some cool artwork. I do like the large character discs, they're nice and chunky and the board looks great on the table. Setup doesn't take too long at all, but you do have to be careful creating player roles in case you accidentally miss up decks or add the wrong cards, but the rulebook does come with a clear table that helps. So, we've set up the game, created player decks and assigned roles to all the players. But what is Among Cultists and how does it play? During the game, investigators will be moving about the board representing a university, where the only qualification they'll be getting is a first degree, murder. Here, investigators will encounter each other and take actions to ultimately move book tokens onto the shelf scoring area for victory points. To do this, they need to fill the rooms with action cards, namely success cards, that in turn will activate those rooms, allowing investigators to take a risk in gaining those tokens. Cultists, on the other hand, will be doing similar, but trying to hinder these actions by filling rooms with sabotage and failure cards. This means when any player attempts to claim a book token for scoring, there's a higher chance of failure. Not only that, when players congregate together, rather than having a keg party, they'll gain and pass status cards to each other. The more times you interact with a player, the more likely you are to meet a cultist, increasing your chances of receiving a dead card. This is not good, because you're dead. You just don't know it yet. As we'll see, players can also check the health of other characters in the game to determine whether cultists have handed them dead status cards, as well as initiate votes if they feel players are acting suspicious by chanting and assassinating people. It's a dead giveaway, folks, so trust no one. The object of the game depends on your alliance. Investigators win if they can score a predetermined number of victory points from claiming book tokens within the rooms, or have identified who the cultists are and eliminated them by a vote. But cultists only need to kill a certain number of investigators or prevent them scoring the required number of victory points by round 10. However, certain events come into effect that all players will need to navigate. Let's look at the mechanics more closely. Briefly, a round consists of 4 phases. During movement, each player can move a number of spaces across the map to enter hallways and rooms, as well as accidentally bumping into each other. Whoops! Movement is done in turn order, and I'll explain the importance of being vigilant during this phase a bit later. Next is a simple event phase, where a token is drawn from the Bag of Doom and generally affects the game for the remainder of the round. These can decrease a player's movement, open portals, and even cut power to the university. Now, during movement, if you ever move into a room that has exactly one other character, you both need to trade one of your status cards from your hand with the other player, and this is termed an encounter. Investigators begin the game with a status deck consisting of only alive cards. However, cultists will have a mix of dead and alive status cards and therefore can choose which card to trade. These are always kept face down and never revealed, even by the owner of the new card, where over the course of the game, these become that player's pulse deck. During the action phase, each player chooses to carry out a character or a room action. Room actions allow players to choose and place one of their action cards face down into a room deck. This is done secretly, where investigators only have access to success cards, but cultists can choose between success, failure and sabotage cards that eventually allow the room to be activated. From that point, players can check a room and reveal a random card, hoping to gain a success card, and this is how you claim book tokens for victory points. If taking a character action, a player can check the state of another character in their room. Here they secretly look at the player's pulse deck. If it shows only alive cards, then they both continue on their journey. However, if cultists have encountered this player and slipped in a dead card or two, then unfortunately the player has been killed and becomes a ghost for the remainder of the game. Other character actions include placing action cards in an off-board deck called the Unsafe Passage. When a room becomes activated from players placing cards in the room decks, a token is flipped, and if it shows the unsafe symbol, you'll need to randomly draw a card from the Unsafe Passage. These can add cultist tokens to the board that prevent players claiming book tokens until defeated, or worse, the Fishman comes into play that blocks off certain areas of the university. All I've done here is briefly gone over the basic mechanics, but the game becomes quite tense. Firstly, anytime you and another player find yourself alone in a room, you must carry out an encounter. Trading a status card spreads immediate distrust, and it's even better to watch this as a cultist fanning the flames. Obviously, cultists want to be handing their dead cards to all investigators as quickly as possible, but this will result in others being highly suspicious of your activities, and if anyone is clever enough to check a player's state and find out they're dead, fingers will certainly point in your direction. This will likely lead to players activating a vote action, which is one of my favourite mechanics in the game. Here you discuss what you make of other player actions and either look to determine who the cultists are or sow seeds of doubt. Either way, finger pointing could lead to early dismissal for a cultist or investigator, so both parties really need to play it cool here. There is so much deceit and dishonesty in this game, and I love it. For instance, if an investigator looks at a pulse deck of another player, they must tell the truth. Is the character dead or alive? But if you're a cultist and the other player is dead, you can outright lie and tell the rest of the group that they're alive and well. And this works best to set doubt if another player begins to second guess your buddy cultists. However, this can backfire, as it has with me. If an investigator decides to check their state and see you've lied, well then it's game over for you. But being dead isn't all that bad. Firstly, cultists don't have to reveal themselves. Ghosts continue to play, and they have altered actions that include moving anywhere across the map and can still add and reveal cards to rooms. Don't worry, there are far more shenanigans that investigators need to overcome. As investigators, you need to claim book tokens from rooms to gain victory points. But in order to do this, you must fill the room, which is to place action cards in that specific room deck. Once there's enough, the room can now be activated where player actions can reveal cards from that deck. But it's not easy to decipher who has put what cards there. This is because at game setup, one random success, sabotage or failure card is placed in each room area, so you're never sure what's there from the start. Success cards allow you to claim tokens, but sabotage force you to put them back. This is similar for the unsafe passage deck, which starts the game with a few cards already present. Drawing bad cards will hold investigators up by deploying cultist tokens and the fishman in the university. But if there appears to be a large number of cards in the deck, players simply need to backtrack actions for hints. There is also a very clever mechanic I've not talked about yet, and that's route cards. At the start of the game, each player is given a unique route card hidden from all players. This indicates the specific room that a player can activate in particular rounds. During play, characters will be moving between rooms and hallways, but can only carry out an action such as fill the deck or try to claim a book token if they are in a room during the correct round, and this will be different for every player. This is where all players must be watchful, and that's because cultists can activate any room on any turn regardless of the route card. But they need to be careful. If caught activating the same colour room on consecutive turns, then this is, excuse the pun, a dead giveaway. To get around this, you'll need to remind all players, cultist or not, to ensure they regularly check their route card. In theory, cultists don't need to do this, but if they pretend to look at their card, then it makes them look like an investigator analysing their turn, which is a great way to throw players off your scent. Likewise, when choosing actions or status cards, it's encouraged for all players to look at their hand and pretend to consider what to play. Choosing a status card blindly from your hand is an absolute giveaway you're an investigator, where the game will lose tension immediately. The game is best played at higher player counts. Firstly, you get to add a number of additional roles like assassins, a seer or mechanic that all give players a unique ability, which is great fun. I wouldn't recommend it for your first game, but certainly look to chuck in a few of these at some point. Also, players could start the game dead and not know it, which gives the cultist a little advantage deciding at which point that player could have been targeted. From this, I really enjoy the setup phase of creating player decks and the roles. I find it quite exciting learning my role, where everyone immediately becomes defensive and it becomes quite a thematic part of the game. The game itself is very simple and relatively quick. Similar games like Unfathomable are also great but very long in playtime, but this is quite a snappy game with some awesome table talk delivered. The events are well thought out, where at some point you could go into radio silence, no talking. If the power is cut, the encounter mechanic has an open player count for trading status cards due to darkness, so do not congregate at this time. You do, however, have to play smart. By this I mean regularly look at your cards in hand to fit in. Take note of who activates a room, adds a card, or how many encounters you've had with players, as this is a must to identify cultists if investigators can't get victory points. Likewise, cultists must play it cool. If characters start dropping like flies, it becomes obvious, where backtracking encounters becomes easier than you think, so be warned. I also like the fact there's no player elimination, where you can become a ghost and still carry out actions, albeit limited. There are also 2 expansions available. Down to the Abyss is set within a research station built to study some unknown entity deep in the ocean. The game introduces a completely new map and includes boats as a quicker way to move across the map, but these are treacherous. The Mountains of Chaos expansion takes place within a claustrophobic mine. There's a revolving door that blocks off areas of the map, and this will rotate each round, as well as an elevator that players can use. The Lifeline event token forces players to reveal 1 card from their pulse deck, where players could become ghosts, and the Mountains of Chaos also includes an optional module to set up for a detective and informant role. These expansions add little twists to the base game. They have new maps and unique mechanics, but other than that they play the same. They do, however, come with awesome new roles. The detective can locate the informant, the exorcist can bring back the dead, and the profiler doesn't have to shuffle the pulse cards before checking a player's state, so they know what the last card traded was. Sneaky. The expansions aren't a must, but do add some nice variants if you're a fan of the game. I enjoyed Among Cultists. It was simple to learn and teach, but develops a whole lot of tension and great deal of table talk. The encounters spice things up, and I really like the fact there's no player elimination, although I do recommend playing this at the highest player count. I do think that this game can be used to introduce players that are new to hidden role games as well as the experienced gamer. However, you must remember to mull over card choice whatever your role, as a savvy player can easily spot when there's been a lapse in concentration. Thanks for watching. This is Ninja Geek Games. Cheers.